And welcome into the Dino Construction Podcast. Justin, joined by David and JP as always. Couple matchups between the three of us. David, I beat you. What happened in you two's matchup that you guys had?
Oh, hey, I beat JP. Thankfully, it was followed up my great week last week with maybe the worst week of the season, but at least I beat JP.
JP, you at least managed to beat the league median in that league, right?
No, Nico Collins' long touchdown was not
Dang,
counted.
just rubbing his face in it, man. That's rude.
I know. Yeah, no, it was not. It wasn't the best week. I mean, I did check Dave and I's matchup in like the middle of Sunday, and I was projected to win by like 15, 20. I was like, shoot, let's go. Did not end up going well the rest of the week.
I had a bad fantasy weekend, so I had to be mean there. Sorry about that, JP. All right, so we're gonna hop right into wide receivers. Just real quick plug: if you haven't hit that subscribe button down below, easiest way to help out the channel. Really appreciate those of you who already have. So we are going to start with the most fun topic, the young stud wide receivers. We're going to just go down a bunch of guys that we feel like are worth having conversations about, possibly because they've just been ascending in value like crazy, possibly because we're not really sure what to do with them because of their situation. Starting with the highest ranked guy in Keep Trade Cut out of the guys we thought are worth discussing, JJ Chase. There's no question marks there. There's no real uncertainty. Malik Neighbors, though, Tommy Cutlets is starting there now. That news came out this morning. He's only averaging 12 points per game since week 7. That makes him wide receiver 32 in that time. We were incredibly bullish. We had him up here above guys like CD and Nico Collins, guys that are, have shown that wide receiver kind of one overall upside. Did we kind of jump the gun a little bit, do you guys think, in this kind of inept giant offense on where he should be in Dynasty? Obviously, he's a stud, but did we jump the gun a little bit?
I don't think so. Look, he's gone from 22.9 fantasy points before the injury, 12 points after the injury. That's pretty bad. Look at targets, target share, not too big of a decrease, down from 13 to 10.5 targets per game, 36% target share down to 32%. Not too bad, in my opinion. The big thing is he had 3 touchdowns in the first 4 games, 0 since coming back. Wide receivers have hot and cold streaks. He's a great player. We've seen it. His offense sucks. It should get better. I see no reason to sell Malik. In fact, if the manager that has him is getting cold feet, maybe reach out and see if you can get him a little cheaper than you should be able to.
Yeah, I don't necessarily regret it because we saw that he is capable of being a guy that is an elite playmaker. And I mean, I think he was a top 2 or 3 wide receiver before he went out with the injury. So that's all I really needed to see, that he was capable and that good already as soon as he stepped foot in the NFL. The targets, like David said, they're not massively different. It's just like the yards per target have been down and no touchdowns.
Let's look at guys below him in Keep Trade Cut ratings. We still prefer him over CD Lamb. First of all, do we prefer him over CD Lamb in a vacuum, David?
I don't know. I think I would go CD, but right now my portfolio has more Neighbors than CD for sure. We've seen it for longer from CD. We've seen full seasons of dominance. He's still playing well this season. He's having a great year. I think he's maybe wide receiver 4 or something. Neighbors has that as his ceiling. That's what we're hoping he shows he can do regularly, and we've already seen it from Lamb. Not enough of an age difference for me at this point to want to pull the trigger on trading Lamb for Neighbors straight up.
Yeah, obviously Neighbors is younger, but I'm going to stick with CD because I know that he has a quarterback that is very good, and I have no idea who the quarterback's going to be next year for Neighbors. And the rest of the season, who knows how good it's really going to be with Tommy DeVito, Drew Lock combination going forward.
Cash price, though, let's just say, is 3 first still kind of the fair value on this guy that you're willing to pay if we're having that same discussion of a 3 firsts of value? Is that something you're willing to part with if you have it? Obviously, it's harder to do in a start 11, start 9, start 10. Is that the type of price you think you have to pay for him?
If I'm looking to buy Neighbors, I have to be prepared to pay something in that neighborhood. I'm not able to do it on every team, but I think if that's what I'm targeting, then that's about market value.
In the neighborhood, I love it. Yeah, no, that's probably what you're going to need to be able to get Neighbors. I don't think I'm going to want to send an early first in that package, obviously, but yeah, I don't think I'm going to get him otherwise. Start 11, it's a little bit harder, to send those picks away, but still probably would consider it if I needed and I had the ammunition, obviously.
And moving along to a guy that we already talked about a little bit, CD Lamb. Obviously, if we're competing, we're a little bit worried about the situation going on here. We're a little bit worried about the ineptitude we've seen from this offense, whether or not the coach is going to get fired. Are they going to go to Trey Lance? Will they be able to put up points or stay in ball games? Will CD just get shut down at some point even? There's a million concerns we have. If he strains any muscle, will they just say, oh, well, season's over, keep him say for next year. Who can say about any of those things? But how concerned, first of all, are you about him if you have him on a competing roster?
Yeah, I mean, week 10 when he played Philadelphia, I mean, he had 10 targets for only 21 yards. Cooper Rush just looked abysmal out there. I was pretty darn concerned after that because, man, that was rough. But this last week, Cooper Rush, he looked a lot more comfortable against Houston. And CD had 12 targets. I mean, we know he's a target hog, but he had 18.7 fantasy points this time. So I'm not quite as worried as I was before. I think he's probably still, he's not a mid to high end wide receiver one anymore, but he's probably still in that wide receiver one range, mid to low, wherever that might be. It's just the touchdowns I think are going to be down for sure. Before I was thinking, oh shoot, I better look to move this guy for an Amon Ra or Nico or something like that. But now I don't think I'm as motivated to have to do that, but I'm still definitely open to doing it because those guys have much more upside the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think the big thing is the ceiling there that you were talking about. He's still their best player. He's still going to get targeted, 10 plus times a game, probably. Unfortunately, the touchdown upside is pretty much non existent. Even the yards are going to be down. I don't know if that's enough to sell low. I do think you got to be a little concerned about, like you said, them shutting him down. I think they're still playing to win because a lot of those guys are fighting for their jobs, probably. I think McCarthy's on the hot seat for sure. I watched the game last week and CD definitely looked frustrated at times. I can see maybe something boiling over. Hopefully not. I think you got to be a little worried if he's on your team and you're competing. I mean, obviously, you don't want one of your best players to have question marks pop up at the end of the year.
No touchdowns in the 2 games without Dak so far. If that trends for the rest of the season, you're never going to believe this. That projects for 0 touchdowns the rest of the season. I did that in my head. That wasn't even the show sheet, guys.
Wow.
Let's talk about, well, it's maybe not tearing up, but like parallel moves. Look over recent trades on Dynasty Daddy involving CD and then JJ or Chase. You need something in the neighborhood between a first and second, perhaps a 1-2 swap in value to make the swap. So I guess first question, are you willing to give a second in a vacuum to move up to either of those two guys?
I think if I'm competing, that's fair.
Yeah, for those two, I would.
Would you consider a 1-2 swap if you're competing?
I'll be honest, if I have the ammo and it's Chase right now, just because the heater he's on, I believe he can win me a championship. I'd have to think long and hard about it. That's a lot to pay to move from elite receiver to elite receiver, but if it gets you a championship, it's worth it.
Now I'm just thinking about a league where we're both competing where I could offer you that. Would you take in Champions League? You have Chase. Would you move Chase for CD in a 1-2 swap, David?
I don't know if I can move off Chase on a competitor. You can send it and I'll
Are
think
you
about
competing?
it.
You're 6-5. Come on.
Yeah, I also have most points and max points for. Been a frustrating ride in that league. So maybe honestly, you send it and I'll think about it. But man, Chase is just he's killing it, man. He's gonna win people money this year, and I like to win money.
What if they shut him down because their season's not going well and he did
Stop
not
it.
he didn't get paid, right? He wanted to get paid, he didn't.
Don't put that evil on his name.
I think he like there is people speculating. You hear people in other podcasts talking, speculating about him shutting himself down if he, injures anything and they're out of the playoffs. I was listening, like their next matchup's a tough matchup, but then they have like 4 easy games in a row. They have their next matchup, then if they lose that one, they have 8 losses and they might actually, honestly, So hey, there's always a possibility, but what can you do? So let's look at trades involving CD and Nico or Amon Ra on Dynasty Daddy, and we're looking at about a second to move from CD to either of the other two. Are you willing to pay that to go within this range?
I don't think so. I mean, I have Amon Ra somewhere and I'm rebuilding and I reached out to the manager that has CD. He's like, I won't even pay anything on top. I was like, shoot, I'd probably take a third just to move Amon Ra for CD and a third on a rebuilder. But to move a second, I don't think so. Just because I think he's still going to be pretty good. And when it comes to Nico, I mean, we only saw a small sample still. I love Nico, obviously, but no, not quite. Maybe a 2-3 swap I would do, but not a second straight up. Late second, maybe I would.
I see you're towing that line and finding it. I think I'm there with you. I'm going to probably hold CD. Huge fan of his long term. Obviously, we love the position he's in. Same with Nico and really Amon Ra too. Don't get me wrong, but I think I could do more with that second to help my championship percentage than moving from elite wide receiver to elite wide receiver. And obviously we've talked about the risks with CD, and those don't really exist with Nico and Amon Ra. So I suppose if you're just flushed with picks somehow and you're a powerhouse that you're still competing, yeah, that might be interesting. But if I'm kind of limited and this is one of my few shots I get, I'm going to probably try to do something else.
All right, and let's talk moving moving down a little bit as well. Let's look at going down to AJ Brown or Garrett Wilson. It looks like the price point you can pick up and profit is about a second round pick. Given the injury concerns, are you willing to take either of those two? I feel like you're more likely to take one than the other. Let's start with David.
I don't know if that's enough for me right now. Maybe if I have Hurts and I'm interested in a stack just because that's fun. If it's an early second, I think I'm thinking about it because then I can flip that early second and maybe help my team in another way.
What about for Wilson?
I'm worried about that offense, man. They just don't look very good. I know he's still putting up points, but every time you watch it in front of you, you're like, man, this offense just does not find rhythm very often. I think I would consider it in both situations. After seeing what he did last week, CD's concerns are a little bit lessened for me. So I think that's right on the line.
And JP, are you kind of avoiding both of those tier downs too for that little of a price point?
Yeah, if I'm just picking up a second, I will stick with CD because I'm not so sure, not 100% confident this guy's score much more than CD rest of the season. And I mean, there's a lot of rumors right now around Aaron Rodgers not. I heard Woody Johnson wanted to bench Aaron Rodgers before this past game. So
They just let go of their GM too. They cut their
yeah,
GM. So
Yeah, for all those people that thought he was smarter than Brian Gutekunst, where he at now?
ah, I
yeah,
don't know what that name was that you just said, but I assume it's the Packers GM.
yeah,
Yes, sir.
Goody.
He seems to at least know something about QBs.
There's a pretty popular clip of Pat McAfee talking. I think it was Rappaport, one of the insiders. They're talking about how smart Douglas is. And the insider calls them both smart GMs. And McAfee's like, "Are we sure Gutekunst is a smart GM?" And people have been dunking on it a lot today.
Today, Pat McAfee said on his show, he said he took the L on the Joe Douglas comment. So yeah.
Oh, nice. Good for him.
And last tier down we're looking at, would you be willing to take a little bit more of an upside swing? It looks like on Dynasty Daddy, we're seeing trades where people are getting about a first, a second, and let's say Pickens or JSN. Seems a little light for me. What do you guys think?
Depends on where the first is. If it's a non-playoff first, I got to think about it. If not, I'll probably hang on.
Yeah, in a vacuum, probably not quite, but I would at least consider it because both of those guys have been red hot in the last few weeks.
Fortunately, I never admit when I'm wrong, so I'll never have to take an L on JSN.
Oh, you will in just a few minutes, my friend.
Oh, shoot. Let me just delete that part of the show. Wait, oh, and he's gone. He's gone. All right, and moving on to our next player, Garrett Wilson. Just talked a little bit about him as a potential tier down from CD, but let's kind of evaluate him on his own. He's killing it on the year. Wide receiver 5 in total points, but wide receiver 12 in points per game. Leads the NFL in target, 4th in targets per game. On pace for over 100 receptions and 1,100 yards. Still just 24. Averaging 0.7 less points per game and 1.6 less targets since Devontae Adams has came. When we see that wide receiver 5 number, we think maybe he's in tier 1 discussion. However, when you look at the points per game, maybe not as much. I'll start with David here because you are our resident Buckeye aficionado. All things Buckeyes, you do have the first go at. So give us what you got.
The prompt is he in the tier 1 discussion. We kind of answered it when we were talking about the tier down with CD. If we're not willing to take a second to move from CD to Wilson, they're probably not in the same tier. I do think he's pretty much survived the acquisition of Devontae Adams. So with a strong finish, if you can get that points per game number up a bit and stay in the top 5 in total points, maybe we can have this discussion again in the offseason, realistically. Right now, I think he's just, strongly in tier 2.
Yeah, I think he has the talent and the ability to be a tier 1 wide receiver, but in that offense with all the Aaron Rodgers speculation, no, I'm definitely not going to put him there yet. But I mean, I was very bullish on him. He had the 3rd best man coverage success rate and reception perception, his zone, press scores, everything just looks really good. And it looks like with Devontae coming in, Garrett Wilson, he looked like the alpha, which is, it's an aging Devontae Adams for sure. And he was just coming in, but no, Garrett Wilson looked phenomenal. I think he's got all the tools to be a tier 1 guy, but I'm not there with him unless he gets a quarterback that I feel confident in.
I agree with that general. He's not quite there, knocking on the door. We could still see him if he maintains this type of performance throughout the year, maybe get a little bit closer to it. But then next year he's a year older, and what's going on with the QB room? And we're about to talk about at least 1 or 2 guys that I think have a pretty good chance of passing him, honestly, in rankings if they continue doing kind of what they have been doing recently. So let's move on to that first guy who in DLF 1 QB startup ADP is a first round startup pick, wide receiver 12 on keep trade cut, Brian Thomas Jr. Had a bad last month due to circumstances, an injury to himself, injury to his quarterback, 15.5 points per game pre-injury, 7.7 since then. How are we kind of approaching him at this point? Like in our tier episode that we did, we had him a little bit lower. Got to admit, we should have him bit closer to the top than where we had him. Obviously, he's not tier one. I just want to kind of start the conversation with how far from Garrett Wilson is Brian Thomas Jr.? Would you take a second in Brian Thomas Jr. or Garrett Wilson just in a vacuum, David?
I think I'm slightly on the Wilson side in a vacuum, but in practice, I would take it right now because I got a ton of Wilson.
I think that's about fair. Probably have Garrett Wilson around wide receiver 9-ish and Brian Thomas Jr. 11 or 12. So I might slightly lean the BTJ side because I know what his quarterback situation is moving forward.
I guess if I'm not competing, I'm a lot more likely to take the package. But if I'm competing, I'm worried about BTJ rest of the season. I don't know what we're going to get from Lawrence.
Yeah, I do know in the Ballers strength of schedule, they also were worried about injuries aside, quarterback play aside, just the matchups that the Jaguars should get the rest of the season when they were talking about people that might underperform in the playoffs. So rest of season, I certainly would take Wilson, but I think it's an interesting discussion. I think he's definitely an ascending piece. Someone I recently paid 2 firsts for. We discussed that as a pretty reasonable price for him in our mock draft episode. So let's talk a couple more trade opportunities. Would you rather take BTJ or Odunze and a second? Kind of going on tier down here.
I think I'm taking Odunze in the second personally.
I am because I think Dunes is a slightly.
I was a little surprised to see this one on Dynasty Daddy happen. I think I saw it a couple times even. I like Odunze rest of the season more, and I like his future a little bit more, but I'd be happy to have either on my roster. So I'll take the second.
Yeah, that's a tough one for me. I'm a BTJ guy here over Odunze easily. I would take, but not a second easily. Like in a startup, I'd definitely take Brian Thomas Jr. over Odunze, but the second, that's a little steep for me too. And other trades that we saw, I know my answer for this one. BTJ and a late second for a mid 25 and 26 first.
I'll take BTJ in the second as long as I've got the ammo.
Yeah, slightly lean that way, but it's very close.
And now let's talk tier up bigger fish hunting, although a little questionable, potentially on the upside like we talked about. BTJ at a mid to late first or CD Lamb.
I think I got to take the package here. That's tough, man. We just put BTJ's valuation around 2 first, and we're adding a. Now that I think about it more, I'm going Lamb.
I was about to say,
It's really
man,
close, but
it's all about that first. If you say it's a mid, I might slightly lean BTJ. I think I slightly prefer CD Lamb because I know he's got that hammer lead upside.
All right. So getting it on a price point there. It's an interesting one. He's one I'm much more interested in buying than selling, but he's also an expensive one to buy. I just think that if he didn't get injured, if Trevor Lawrence didn't get injured and he was still on that kind of heater he was to start the season, we'd be having tier 1 discussions, honestly. Spoiler alert, I think we expect both of those players to be healthy going into next year. So very interesting guy. And I think we're all agreeing that 2 firsts, we've all agreed in the previous episode, decent price point to buy him if you can afford it and if you don't need him to be competing this year, but not necessarily a competing piece with all those extenuating factors. Moving on to a guy who I think is a competing piece rest of season. Wide receiver 13 on keep trade cut. Been producing with Russ, 9.9 points per game with Fields, almost doubled 17.7 with Russ. 1 spot behind BTJ on keep trade cut. So let's play that same game, but we replace BTJ and Pickens. So let's look at Pickens or Odunze in a second.
Odunze in a second for sure there.
Yeah, I'm definitely there.
Pickens and a late second for a mid 25 and 26 first.
I'm taking the first there.
And Pickens and a mid first for CD Lamb.
Lamb. I think the real key here is that I was surprised that Pickens and BTJ were so close on keep trade cut, honestly.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I definitely prefer BTJ. I think they're doing fairly similar things, but BTJ is doing it as a rookie. And Russell Wilson, since he started on just deep balls alone, he was top 5 in the NFL in EPA, and that's not EPA per play; it's just total in the season. When he didn't even start the first 4 or 5 games, it was an absurd just a stat that I saw. So I kind of think that the deep balls that they have been hitting on probably gonna not connect on quite as much because that would be a historic rate if they really do if he sticks to that kind of efficiency on the deep balls, but. Still, no, Pickens, I don't want to discount what he has done. I mean, he's 3rd in the NFL in receiving yards right now. I just don't have him quite there with Brian Thomas Jr. But the question for me, Justin, would be BTJ or Pickens and a second.
Where's the second at? And am I competing? Like on a team where I'm competing and it's the guaranteed 201, I'm thinking about it. If it's like the 201, 202, something like that, I'm competing and I need someone who I think is more of a hammer. I'm considering it. But at the end of the day, I think I'm always just going to consider it and then go with the guy that I think could be tier one next year in BTJ. I don't really see a world where Pickens is going to enter tier one category.
Yeah.
Maybe he does. Maybe he surprises all of us and continues killing it. But even producing 17.7 points per game, which is his average with Russ so far, like that's not tier one points per game, right? That's good.
Yeah.
That's not 23, 25 points per game like a Nico, a CD, an Amon Ra, JJ, Chase. Those types of guys can and have done at times. So going to have to show a lot more before I'm willing to make that swing on him.
Yeah, and he's definitely somebody who's a riser, though. So definitely don't think that we're kind of crap on Pickens. I think he's a top 20 dynasty wide receiver for sure, and a really good starter in your lineup. And I'm curious what we think about him compared to the next guy.
Well, I have Pickens above JSN, our next guy, personally, if I am competing, or probably honestly, if I'm not. I still just think that there's a lot going on with DK Metcalf competing with him there too. I think DK is going to be the alpha, even though I think JSN can be really good. JSN, wide receiver 14 on keep trade cut, has been producing pretty well. DK was out for a while, as we previously mentioned. Wide receiver 10 in total points, wide receiver 17 in points per game with no minimum on games played. So a little bit higher, honestly, in points per game if we, screen out some of those outliers. 0.2 points per game behind Metcalf, 8th in the NFL in targets, barely valued above a mid 25 first on keep trade cut. Both of you guys paying a truly, like, it could miss the playoffs, could make the playoffs first for JSN at this point?
I think situationally I might not, but in a vacuum I definitely would. Yeah.
In a vacuum, yeah, I would.
Yeah, I think I got to take the L in general on him. I just think he is somewhat capped unless they move on from DK. I don't think he's going to ever be a guy that can ascend into tier one. Do you guys see a path for him to ascend that high?
I think tier 2.
Probably
is
not
where-
tier one, but yeah, I think tier two is possible.
I think I agree on that one. So let's play the same game we did with BTJ. JSN and a second or a mid 25 and 26 first?
I think I'm probably taking JSN there, but well, I don't know. It depends on my team. If I need a receiver and I've got the first, I can think about it. If I'm rebuilding, I'd probably re-roll.
Is this for a contender or a rebuilder?
It's for you, JP. What are you?
If not a contender, I might consider it. I mean, he's been relatively consistent the first 3 weeks. Kind of something like they're trying to figure out his role in the new offense. But I mean, he's 3 games over 21 points, and like I said, been relatively consistent. I know that this year the Seahawks have been throwing the ball a ton. I think Gino leads the NFL in passing attempts, so I think that's raising him up a little bit here. But no, I would definitely smash the other side in a rebuild, but I think it's about fair.
All right. And are we going JSN or Odunze just in a vacuum? I'm going to take the second off there.
That's really tough.
I didn't want to ask you an easy question.
I mean, I think Odunze's got that tier 1 upside, so I'm going to
I was going to say, yeah, I think very slightly into a Dunze. Kind of wondering the same about Jason versus Pickens, though, just because they're so close on keep trade cut.
Yeah, I would slightly lean JSN, but it's not by much. It's very, very close. Probably have them back to back, honestly, if I were to do rankings right now.
Yeah, if you give me a third on either side, I'd go that way. But in a startup, I think I'm taking JSN first.
All right. Interesting players to talk about. I think that all of the guys we've discussed so far are, when we read down the keep trade cut rankings, are guys that I think we'd all agree we don't want to overpay for any of these guys, but these are all guys that we view as, maybe with the exception of CD being kind of capped at ceiling of being a tier 1 wide receiver. We probably, would you agree we view these guys as all kind of ascending assets more or less so far?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so.
So kind of green buy flag, but we just want to caution not overpaying for these guys. A slight overpay is okay if you can afford the slight overpay, especially I think kind of the way, maybe just to talk about like how we want to try to buy these guys. We talk about in price points of picks, right? But if you can turn older players into part of that price value to get younger within the deal also is like a phenomenal way to structure a deal, right? So if you can take a guy like a Terry McLaurin and a second. If you can get like a first valuation for Terry McLaurin, which is his price point on Keep Trade Cut right now, not something I'm willing to pay for, something I'd definitely sell him for, and a mid to early second for him, something like that, right? So like if you can try to get older players that are producing somewhere in the same range as these guys are and add picks to them. That's the way I love to get young at wide receiver. Do you guys kind of agree with that general strategy rather than just the cash price if you can?
Oh yeah, perfect example right now is if BTJ's on a competitor's team, maybe reach out and see if you can improve their production, give them a little pick as insurance, and get the stud back in return.
I'm actually considering sending that offer out to somebody for BTJ and centering a deal around Pacheco and McLaurin, which is a little light of 2 firsts in value. I got to be honest. What's
Wonder
the
which
what's
league
the
that could
delta
be.
there in between those guys? Help me out here.
I'm not going to. I plead the fifth.
Is it because you know what league it's in?
Yeah, may or may not be
JP,
talking to
since you
said
maybe
person
haven't figured
about
out
Brian
what
Thomas Jr.
what's that you're trying to buy him?
Maybe, maybe not. I don't know.
JP, since you haven't figured out what league that's in yet, do you want to give me any insight?
I know that's all on you.
Yeah, and also, do you want to tell me how you would equal that value with my roster in that league?
No, I don't know what league you're talking about. It's a hypothetical for the audience, David.
Oh man. On the point of you talking about moving players that might be a little bit older, actually DK Metcalf, I moved him twice to get to some of these guys that are ascending and young. That's the kind of player I like to use, however it may be with picks or whatnot. But I got Garrett Wilson in a deal for DK Metcalf, and I moved him somewhere else. I can't remember what I got for him in that best ball league, but yeah, that's the kind of guy that
Don't have to go with a 30, 29-year-old wide receiver, 27, 26-year-old wide receivers to get to the young 23. If they're producing comparably and you can pay something that's not crazy to get that age, and with that age comes that, potential upside to really go up. Just make sure, I personally am not willing to do that type of like a DK Metcalf plus for a Dunze, a guy that I just haven't necessarily like seen
Maybe
the
pick a
production
different
yet.
name in that area.
But a name where we've actually seen the production is the thing. Like we have seen this production from the guys we're talking about in the list today, right? These are guys we've seen the production that we know they can do it on the NFL field beyond a shadow of a doubt. Adunze has flashed. I'm just not willing to stamp him as, if you're willing to, like that's the risk, right? With a guy like that.
with a rookie quarterback and then two other established veterans, yeah, it's definitely been tough for him to be a high-end producer. So I definitely understand that. But David and I have a lot of confidence in his ability, clearly.
Yeah, I think with how often we've mentioned him in this segment, we maybe should have put him in this segment.
Didn't do enough. Vetoed. Just kidding. Yeah. Plus, the episode would run for literally ever if we added to all of the names. Two more guys we're going to talk about. One of them more in depth, one very briefly. So, Lad McConkey, player number 50 overall on Keep Trade Cut, producing very, very well for a rookie. 12.9 points per game, and wide receiver 21 with 14 points per game after their week 5 bye. Had some boom games, 29.1, 18.3, 17.7. Valued just below a mid 25 first on Keep Trade Cut. Third in missed tackled force per reception perception behind Shakir and Flowers. Just looks like he is a great wide receiver so far. Guy I'm very interested in buying. Let's talk about a trade that JP and I just had go down not that long ago. I paid Olave, Christian Kirk, and a third, I believe it was, for Lad, a team that I'm still trying to convince myself I can compete on this year. Pretty concerned about Olave. We'll talk about him later on in a injury segment that we do. So I'm just curious, David, as the bystander on that trade, as an Olave guy, did I get fleeced?
I mean, if you're competing, I understand it. You obviously dealing with some injuries there with Olave and Kirk on the squad. So if I have the flexibility to take the package in that deal, I would take the package, but I understand why you did it. So I wouldn't say you got fleeced, but I think it was good for both of you.
And just in general on the price, mid first, random 25 first, which side are we taking there, that or Lad?
If I'm trying to buy points to make a run, maybe I guess Lad, but I still prefer JSN at that price.
It's really tough because I think he's great. I mean, the reception perception rookie report just came out. He had the best man coverage score success rate wise, and he's got really good hands too. It's just that offense, it seems like they've been kind of spreading it around. Like Justin, you mentioned multiple times that they've kind of been opening it up. I think he's really good, but you make a good point too, David. But what if you can't buy JSN for a first or Pickens? If it costs more, would you be willing to pay the first for Lad? Because I think I would be definitely considering it if it's a fringe playoff first and I needed the player, I think that I would.
Yeah, I think so. If I've already knocked on the other doors and this is my favorite player I can buy for that, that's a fair price.
And just want to touch on the other young Chargers wide receiver. Definitely nowhere near any of the guys we've talked about so far in value. Still young, has been producing mildly well so far this year. 11.8 points per game. 4.5 of those points per game have come off of touchdowns, though. So has been scoring, 0.75 touchdowns per game. That is Quentin Johnson, wide receiver 45 overall, wide receiver 37 in points per game.
But what wide receiver is he in your heart, Justin?
I just don't believe. When I watch them play, I feel like I see a lot of these touchdowns come on busted coverages, but I just want to talk about him a little bit here just because we're talking about Ladd. Are we still out on him? We talked about Jameson Williams earlier this year and admitted we were definitely kind of wrong on him. Quentin Johnson, is there any chance we were wrong on him? He's valued around a mid-second on Keep Trade Cut. What are we taking there, guys?
Oh, I'm definitely taking a second. I think the question is a good one though, but I think Jameson Williams is more due to injury coming out of college, and maybe he actually had an excuse. I don't view him highly. I mean, touchdowns we know is the most volatile stat for a wide receiver, and he's got the 65th most receiving yards. I just think that they're going to add a wide receiver to this group as well, so I would definitely not pay a second for him. I just think that Herbert's lifting them up, and they're trying to salvage what they have with him to make him at least somewhat of a useful player.
Just want to throw out a quick little transition question here. Pick one: Cortland Sutton, QJ, Mooney, or Cedric Tillman.
I'm going to take Mooney.
I figured you would, and I think I would take Tillman with Mooney as a very close second.
Ooh, and Sutton. I think, Justin, are you leaning Cortland Sutton?
I just can't buy in on Tillman personally just yet. I think it's probably Mooney for me, Sutton second, Tillman third, QJ fourth.
QJ definitely fourth. With Tillman, I'm just betting on some upside.
On a contender, I'm definitely taking Sutton, I think. On a rebuilder, though, I'd take Tillman. We just haven't seen anything for a couple years, and it concerns me. But, I mean, like I said, the Jameson Williams thing of not producing at all for a bit there, I don't know.
And we wanted to talk about a couple of those names there because we're going to transition to more targets for contenders. We're going to talk about 5 guys that are all top 25 wide receivers in total point on the season who could potentially be purchased in the neighborhood of a second. How are we going to be dealing with these guys? We're going to start with Juwan Jennings, wide receiver 20 in total points, wide receiver 12 in points per game. Closest pick on Keep Trade Cut to him in value, mid 26 second. So that's probably like a late 25 second. 29.3 points per game in 3 games with at least 85% snap share. Small sample size. You get a huge boom game in there, but you don't get to 30 points per game average in a 3-game sample size without also having other good games in there. So obviously small sample size, hard to know what to do with that. We didn't do a deep dive in who else was missing in all of those games to give you that, but has shown upside. So let's start with, are we paying a late second for him if we need wide receiver help?
I think I would. I just bought him for a third from a rebuilder last week before I put up another good week, and I feel pretty good about that purchase right now. I think I would stretch it to a late second.
Yeah, we would definitely pay a third. A late second, it depends. Because my only problem with Juwan Jennings is it's going to be very crowded with, you got George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey, Ricky Pearsall, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk. It's just moving forward. I mean, this year, I think he is a good buy for sure. But in the future, it's really tough because he's 27, hasn't done anything really notable before this. So I'd almost rather get somebody I feel a little bit better about, but a 2-3 swap I would do. A late second, I probably would hold the second, do something else with it.
Yeah, I got to be competing for that late second.
Sure.
And I guess you kind of talked a little bit, sort of answered already. We view him as just a rental for this season at this point, someone we don't really trust going forward after this year unless it's in best ball and we can just get the spike weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of like the Green Bay Packers wide receiver room just souped up a little bit.
Yeah, he's definitely much better than Wicks. I agree with that, JP. Good point.
Maybe.
Hard to debate at this point, at least for fantasy.
I'm just trying to poke.
If Wicks could catch, on the other hand.
Wide receivers that could catch. That's actually why we were out on Quentin Johnson for a while, and that was why he sucked as a rookie a little bit too. Try to catch if you play wide receiver, guys. Moving on to Khalil Shakir, wide receiver 19 in total points, wide receiver 34 in points per game. Closest pick on Keep Trade Cut in early 26 second, so that's probably pretty close to a mid 25 second valuation. valuation, had 9 targets per game over the last 5 weeks, double-digit PPR points in every game but one this season. So a lot of floor, not a lot of ceiling, not like the boom boom ceiling. 3 games with 15 or more points, none with 20 or more. Again, testament to that floor, but no ceiling. 1 game below 10 PPR was a game when he played 38% of the snaps coming off a week he missed with injury. So again, a guy you can trust, fantastic wide receiver, 6 in a start 11, right? That, if he's your 4th, 5th flex play, you feel great about the floor. But also sometimes in your 4th or 5th flex play, you'd much rather have a guy with ceiling potentially too. It just depends on your team build. Let's start out with a late 25 second, because I'm not even sure both of you guys are willing to pay that for him, just to make sure if you are.
Yeah, I thought this evaluation was a little high on Keep Trade Cut. I don't know if I'm paying a second for him. I might do a 2-3 swap, but I'd rather have Jawan Jennings.
JP, late second.
I just have a similar problem with the Bills wide receiver room with Keon and Amari Cooper and Shakir. It's just like
But they got rid of MVS, who was actually the best wide receiver there, so it's kind of a clear room now.
right. It's just they just only really play him in the slot, and like Curtis Samuel can take some snaps there. Dalton Kincaid. So, gosh, if I exhausted my other options between guys like Mooney and Sutton and Jawan Jennings, maybe I would. But I think I'm kind of a similar spot with Jennings, though, as a 2-3 swap, but I slightly lean Jennings.
And then same question we're going to go through for all these guys. Do we view him as having much, if any, value next year in this offense as well? Similar role, do you think? Or is he a 1-year rental?
Probably has about the same role. Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't think he's probably a guy that's just like a high-end wide receiver 3 producer, maybe mid.
If we think he's going to have the same role next year in this offense, giving you between 10 to 16 PPR points on average most weeks, right? I think a late second's not a terrible valuation if you need to fill in a spot and you have a lot of other hammers in your lineup.
It's just not exciting. I want to buy upside. I like to take swings. Shakir doesn't win any championships,
Yeah, I mean, I will say he's top 3 in yards, yak yards, like Justin.
Do you also
Yeah.
say ATM machine?
David, I was going to say ATM machine. Don't take my shtick. Don't take my bet.
Yeah, he's top 3 in yak per reception. So I mean, and he's been really, really good. He leads the entire NFL in yak. So I think he is a pretty talented player. So maybe you have a good point there, but it is tough because, like you said, David, I want some upside. A guy that could be like a top 15 wide receiver. I think even somebody like Cortland Sutton could push for a top 15 wide receiver finish.
All right. And moving on to Josh Downs, wide receiver, 16 in total points, 18 in points per game. Closest pick on Keep Trade Cut, a late 26 first. Give me the 26 first. 10 times out of 10, personally. Do you guys agree on that one, I assume?
Yeah, I would take the first, but honestly, I'd probably take Downs if I can get him for pretty much any second on a competitor.
Next question was the guaranteed 201 next year or Josh Downs?
It's guaranteed 201. I guess probably the 201, but even if it's, fringe playoff, I think be pretty dumb not to take Downs the way he's playing.
Yeah, I don't know. I might take Downs over 201. I think he's just really, really good. And what makes me think that is just, I mean, obviously what he's doing right now as a second-year player, and I was already pretty intrigued by him because in reception perception, he was the best rookie at getting open. I mean, he's better than Puka Nacua, at least by his success rates. Zay Flowers, overall, he was just a little bit above him. So, I mean, it's a guy who's just a chain-moving guy. He doesn't really do a whole lot down the field. And it's just tough because they have Michael Pittman, A.D. Mitchell, Alec Pierce, running quarterback. So, but he's still doing this, is the thing. For the 201, I think I'd buy a guy that I know is this talented, but a late first, no. I wouldn't do that quite for a guy I think is a little bit limited with that.
Talk about 26 too. You never even know what that's going to be. Of course, those are just like valuation price points and they're always devalued because of time value of money, etc. But yeah, anyways, I think we all agree on the first. Early second, I'd try to buy something else that I like more. I'd try to shoot for like a Terry McLaurin type if I'm competing over a Downs, or like I'd consider going for like a Cooper Cup or something else. Like if I could get that for like we know it's a 201 or 202 and the player with him is actually smart enough to take something other than a first, because otherwise it's going to die on their roster. Realistically speaking, not a bad price point there, but how concerned are we about the rest of season we don't have splits available right now, Flacco versus A-Rich, but he's had good games with A-Rich. He just had a decent game with A-Rich. So do you have any concerns rest of season about that or not, guys?
I have concerns about that offense in general. Rest of season, sure, but I think Downs should be able to be a mid wide receiver too rest of season. Yeah.
It looks like he's supplanted Michael Pittman as the number 1 wide receiver, honestly. So I feel fairly confident. I mean, Joe Flacco was going to him a ton, and it seems like Anthony Richardson kind of picked up on that and just continued riding him. 4
of his 9 games, he's scored at least 19 points. So
yeah, I know we're not doctors here. I know Michael Pittman was supposed to miss. Actually, they were talking IR, and then he played the next week.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing to pay attention to is if Pittman down the stretch like turns things up. We don't know how much that is injury. We don't really know, but at the same time, all you can ask for a guy to do is perform with the situation given him, and he's been doing it. So now the same question of we assume this is a role that is not just this season, but is a role going forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So out of these guys so far, easily the buy that we have that is the longest term asset we view. Next player, Darnell Mooney. Darnell Mooney? I don't know. Darnell. Wide receiver 9 overall, wide receiver 24 in points per game. Closest pick on keep trade cut, early 26 second. So mid ish 25 second kind of evaluation. Are we taking Mooney or a mid second, y'all?
If I'm competing and I need a receiver, I'd pay that for Mooney.
Me too.
I just paid a mid second. I could still miss the playoffs. I'm projected to make the playoffs in a league. I was much more sure before I got upset this week by like someone dropping 180 points in a start 9 on me. One of those weeks. So I just paid that price mid second for him. I think that's fair valuation. Now, next question on him. Well, I guess, would you be willing to pay an early second for him?
If I'd shopped around already, I'd have to consider it. Yeah,
With the injury now, probably not.
That is true.
I guess that's a fair point. I didn't really think about that part, but
We talked pre-show, but forgot to put in the show notes to remember that he tweaked his hammy before the bye week. So he's on bye. You're not in a rush to buy him, right? You're not going to slot him into your lineup before buying him. Thanks for bringing that back up for the fine folks in the audience, JP. Make sure to see if you can wait to buy him until you hear more news on the hamstring. Is it day to day? Is it week to week? Is it week to week IR like Nico Collins was, right? Hamstrings are a fickle thing. Point JP. Next question on him. Do we view this to be a longer term role, right? He's under contract next year. Do we still think he's going to have the same role? Do you think they're going to try to replace him? What's your projection on that, guys? I know we're just projecting.
They just signed him this offseason. So, no, I think he's definitely going to stay in that same role. And I mean, he's impressed, and I think he's a really good fit in Zach Robinson's scheme as well. I mean, they use him out in triple wide receiver sets, and man, he's leading the NFL in 20 plus yard catches, actually. So, he's an explosive play in this offense.
yeah, I think same role, but they might add to the receiver room in general, but I doubt they replace him. They have too many other holes. He's playing too well.
Yeah, their defense is terrible.
And our last kind of surprise top 24 wide receiver we want to talk about, wide receiver 15 in overall scoring, only 35 in points per game. Cortland Sutton, closest pick on keep trade cut, mid 25 second. If you're competing, willing to pay that for him, David?
Yeah, I think so.
Want to buy him in Megala Dynasty? Just kidding. My depth is gone. I got to keep him there.
Dude, right? It's been brutal in that. I don't know how I'm still filling out a lineup every week, but
JP 25 second?
Yeah, probably so.
Not considering an early 25 second, David.
I don't think I could do early with his age.
I agree.
I think I would struggle to as well, but guess it just depends on the situation. If I've shopped everywhere else, I just think I could do more potentially with it. And
I mean, I think that you could buy is somebody like Calvin Ridley for around that same price.
yeah, I just did. And I was going to bring that up in our next section here. I think I got a third back in that trade when I got Ridley. I think a 2-3 swap. If it's an early second, I might be willing to pay that for Sutton, but just early second straight up for either of them, to be honest with you. But I think I lean Ridley over Sutton. I know we haven't gotten to that next section yet. Little allusion to some other guys we're going to be talking about, but just curious, Sutton or Ridley for you guys as well. I'll start with you, JP.
I actually do think it's really close because they're like the same age, but I do slightly lean Ridley because of that schedule. And honestly, I just think he's a little bit better of a wide receiver just from what we've seen in the past.
I agree. It's really close. I think I am going to go Sutton, though, and I just think it's the Bo Nix factor, really. He's coming on strong, and that offense just keeps getting better every week. I think Sutton's going to help me a little more down the stretch than Ridley.
And I know who his quarterback is next year. I think there's a lot more certainty there.
They could cut him and move on, but I don't know if they will.
Yeah, whereas Ridley, he's locked in with that contract. It is very close, though.
But you don't know who Ridley's quarterback is.
Sutton's contract is before the $30 million a year contract. So it's for
It's
this market,
manageable.
it's team friendly. It wasn't, this offseason before all of these last, they were talking about maybe trying to move on from him because of the contract, but it's just, it's ever changing and old contracts, as long as he doesn't try to hold out and leave, which I think he kind of talked about last year. But anyways, I think I agree with David slightly. If it's start 11 or something and I don't need the potential that I think Ridley has I think Ridley has a little bit more upside that we've seen, but not much. I think in a start 9, I'd rather put Ridley in my lineup. In a start 11 Tillman, I'd rather have Sutton and the fact that I believe in him more next year, if that makes sense. Kind of just like the time value of having him then. And last question, I guess we've kind of already answered. We feel like he has the same role next year, more likely than not, like if we're betting men.
I think they add to the room though more than any of these other teams.
Yeah,
So
I'm not.
maybe not same role.
Yeah, going into Sutton's age 30 season, yeah, maybe they do probably add somebody because they'll actually have money this offseason after paying all that money to Russell Wilson. But I don't know. I'm not 100% sure that they will. There's at least a chance that they don't because they added some guys like Troy Franklin, and Vele has been, a piece that has been pretty solid for them as well. So maybe he's the same role, but I'd lean probably not.
Yeah, I think good point. It's definitely likely that they add him, somebody to compete with him. I think he might start out strong, but if it's a high draft capital rookie, they might take over down the stretch too. So definitely something to keep an eye on in the draft season. All right, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to all just name one specific wide receiver buy we want to mention, and we'll kind of talk price points on them. JP, you got a guy ready for us here?
Guy is Calvin Ridley. That's kind of why I brought him up with the Cortland Sutton conversation. And that is because since DeAndre Hopkins has been moved away from this team, since he got traded away from this team to the Chiefs, he has been pretty darn good, 15.5 PPR points per game. And the schedule the rest of the season, if you look at it on Sleeper, it's just a grass of green. He's got a really easy schedule the rest of the year. So that is a guy who I think is a pretty good buy. And if he's your wide receiver 3 or 4 in a contender, I don't think that's all that bad the rest of the season.
My guy that I am looking to buy, price dependent, of course, and probably not on the teams where I also have Puka Nacua, although maybe I should be willing to roster them both. Cooper Kupp. So wide receiver 22 overall, wide receiver 2 in points per game. Of course, he's missed a handful of games, but can only play in the games you're healthy in. My problem is with the price is as a late 26 first. I'm willing to pay an early second for him, a late 26 first. I think if I'm paying a late 26 first, how do I know it's a late 26 first? I'd rather try to pay a late 25 first and do a 1-2 swap rather than bet I know that's a late 26 first. Honestly, I don't care about the time value of money that the 26 first is less valuable than 25 first. I'd rather keep that and hope that it goes. But I could see being willing to pay a 1-2 swap for him. And if it's a 111, 112 and a start 9, and I've shopped everywhere else and I feel like he puts me over the top, I think probably fair. I'd scratch and claw for a third back. But I think if you know you're going to have a buy and you just had a wide receiver go down with an injury, something like that, that's killing you, I think a late first is okay to pay for him. I don't know that I can do it. So I'm first curious if either of you guys would be willing to do it, because I can tell people it's okay, but I don't know if I can do it.
I definitely
I don't
understand
think
that.
I could.
Yeah, I don't think I quite could, just because like the guys like talked about with Sutton, Mooney, I think that those guys, they might not offer that much less upside, honestly, with how they've played, which makes me want to ask you, would you rather have Mooney in a late second or Kupp?
Kupp.
If it was a
Yeah, there I'll
mid-second?
take Cup. I'll still take Cup. If I could get Cup with a couple of seconds, pieces that are each about a second, that's fine. I don't want to spend the first though.
Probably the way to do it is to take a guy like Mooney or Sutton and add a second if you don't want to do the first, because I mean, tough to trade that for an older wide receiver like that.
Sure is. And David, who is your buy?
I'm going to kind of cheat here just because I think they all deserve to be talked about a little bit. And I'm just going to go with the Browns wide receivers. I think I'll give a couple of price points that are pretty close to keep trade cut. Eli Moore, Jerry Jeudy, I think kind of the same, about an early third. Moore is wide receiver 29 overall, 29 in points per game since Winston took over. Jeudy wide receiver 25 overall, 22 in points per game since Winston took over. They both had a spike week. They both had a down week and a couple of mediocre weeks. I think a third is definitely a fair price. I might even pay 2/3, to be honest. Tillman, wide receiver 10 overall and wide receiver 8 in points per game over that span. I don't know if I'm paying an early second, but a mid second I would. He's had 3 games over 18 points, of 3 of the 4 games with Winston over 18 points. Still young. They don't have money to do things, so I think he has the upside of potential future value. Yeah, I think any of these 3 guys could help you win a championship.
I mean, you're talking to the Elijah Moore truther right here.
I figured you'd like him because I also really liked him coming out.
I'm kind of curious. Neither of you guys are competing in this league, so you don't really care, right? You can give me advice. In a best ball league, I think is where these guys are most interesting. Tillman, I think, is a solid start off of what we've seen in a lineup league. Jeudy and Moore, you can flex them if you're desperate, if you're on buys. I'd prefer not to be starting either of them, but I think they're not a bad play.
There's like 6 teams on bye buy this week, I think. So if you're not going to play him this week, don't buy him.
In a best ball league is a 26 second. I mean, keep trade cut Judy's price of a late 26 second. You think that's actually a reasonable price point on him? Are you if you're competing, is that like a type of price you're willing to pay for him?
Being a one QB league, maybe, but I think you might be able to get something a little bit better.
Yeah, it's expensive, but they did just extend him, and I'd have to look at the guarantees. But the way that team is strapped, I don't think they can afford to just move on and replace him with something better.
I saw Ted McMillan was mocked there, so I don't know. They might try to add some wide receivers after moving Amari Cooper, unless they really feel good about Tillman. Maybe they do just rock and roll with this same group. Although I think Elijah Moore might be a free agent, not 100% sure.
I can see them adding to the room for sure, but I think Judy at least has a role next year. Probably Tillman at least too.
Yeah, one QB, I think it's not a bad price because the late second guys aren't nearly as attractive in a one QB.
Yeah, and in a best ball league, I'm much more confident in starting Jerry Judy because I don't have to start him unless he scores enough points.
Yeah, I think he's good enough to stick around as like a wide receiver 3 at the lowest on the NFL roster for the next few years as well. I think he's always going to be useful, at least in a best ball.
All right. Good conversations on all of those guys. And thank you for joining us on another episode of the Dino Construction Podcast. We hope that was as helpful for you as it was for us. Please remember to like, subscribe wherever you listen or review. And from all of us here at the Dino Construction Podcast, until next time.